Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, for those of you who missed it, here's a reminder of yesterday's historic Supreme Court judgment.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
And here was the reaction. Well, for this crucial and historic victory for common sense in this country, we have a number of women to thank for their tireless campaigning and hard work, including the founder of Sex Matters, the very important and influential organisation led by Maya Forstater, who joins me now. Maya, congratulations on your historic victory. It's been a long time coming. Just some initial reaction, if you can, to the events of the last 24 hours.
We were delighted. I mean, we came in as interveners in support of 4 Women Scotland, who've been bringing this case for over 4 years altogether. And it doesn't change the law. It just clarifies what the law has always been, which is that the Equality Act protects women against sex discrimination based on their biology. It's common sense. It's been missold for the past 14 years, and organisations have been running on the basis of gender self-ID instead of sex, causing harm to women and girls.
And the implications of this judgment in your mind are what? I mean, we're already now seeing a pretty vigorous national debate about various policies, organisations that are going to have to change their practices, are going to have to change their approach to things like single-sex spaces and you know, toilets and how we treat people in NHS wards and so on. But, I mean, where do you think the implications of this judgment are going to take us?
I think every organisation is going to have to tear up their policies and start again. It's much simpler than people have thought. There are men, there are women, there are spaces and services that are for men and women, you know, most spaces and services. And then there are things that are single sex. And when things are single sex, it's not a start of a negotiation. And all of the policies that have been adopted in terms of inclusion on the basis of gender identity have no basis in law. And organisations have been doing them thinking that was the Equality Act because that was what they were told. Initially by the regulator for a long time until recently, and by Stonewall and other organisations. And so they've not been following the law. And if they don't, you know, they're already seeing cases against them, cases like mine, obviously, these belief discrimination cases, but then more recently cases like Sandy Peggy, the nurse up in Dundee against NHS Fife, which is about single-sex spaces and about the right of women to have somewhere to change if they have to change for work, toilets, showers, and so on that are single-sex. And we can't win this one by individuals bringing employment tribunals. Now these employers need to adopt new policies that just protect women's rights and are clear about sex.
And I'm just interested, Maya, do you think people should be apologising for where they've been on this issue in the past? We've seen in the papers today calls for sports chiefs to apologise, Labour MPs, even Keir Starmer, to apologise for how they've treated some of the campaigners on this issue. Do you think that would help to draw a line under things, or are you more of a let's just move forward and not look back?
I'm just not holding my breath for anyone to apologise. No one has lost their job over this at all. You know, there's been a dozen employment tribunals now that have been lost by organisations defending these gender self-ID policies, and no one has lost their job for adopting these unlawful policies. I'm not holding my breath for apologies. I just think now the Supreme Court has drawn a line under it. They've made very clear what the law is, and organisations should get in line.
Well, thank you, Maya Forstater. They have indeed drawn a historic line under this debate that has raged within British politics over the last decade, if not longer. Well, with me now in the studio is Marion, Calder, director of 4 Women Scotland, the group that brought the case to the Supreme Court, as well as my panel assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn, and contributing editor at Navarra Media, Michael Walker. Marion, this is obviously a historic day. I mean, what's your initial reaction, a bit like Maya, to the judgment, a remarkable judgment of the last 24 hours and what we've seen?
Absolutely delight. I think that common sense has actually come back into the room.
Yeah.
The adults came back into the room yesterday. It was fantastic to be in the Supreme Court and see the highest court of the land. Clearly, we had taken this case in Scotland, but to see that the 3 male and the 2 female judges unanimously support what we've been saying for the past 7 years, that sex is biological. It's not, as Maya just stated there, it's not complicated. And they reiterated our points that we made in our law, which we've been saying in Scotland for what seems to be for forever.
And what about this point that actually there should be frontline mainstream politicians coming forward, like Nicola Sturgeon, for example, who, of course, tried to jam a pretty radical version of gender identity ideology down people's throats in Scotland?
Well, she originally stated our views weren't valid, so I think find out yesterday, I think our views are valid. and I think some people are genuinely to offer us an apology, and Nicola Sturgeon is one of them.
Yeah, and the implications going forward, as we just heard from Maya, she thinks basically this is going to lead to a wholesale review of policy across the landscape. We're already beginning to see some of that in the papers. I mean, fast forward, 3 to 5 years, where do you think we're going to be within this debate? A kind of full restoration of common sense? Do you think that the radical activists are going to keep trying to carve out some sort of arena for opposition? I mean, how do you see things unfolding from here on?
I think that there are people that are heavily involved with financially or personally, and they're not going to give up easily. If they haven't met women across the UK, we're not going to give up easily. This fight continues, and we're quite stoic in Scotland and leading the charge across the UK and the wider world.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
Indeed. Poppy Coburn, implications for the wider world?
Well, I think, it's obviously common sense is a victory, but it kind of downplays sometimes when we say that, the incredible work that the campaigners have done. So, just thank you for the many years you put into this often very thankless task. I mean, I think the problem is still, although we have this ruling, which is, as you say, unanimous, this should be a line under the debate, let's now move on. Well, the government has given guidance before in these things, and what we've seen is a problem where institutions are still unwilling to budge. Even if there is the weight of the law behind it, they are still unwilling to budge. So I think, we would be naive to think the fight is over. This is going to be something that is ongoing in the next couple of years. I think that's unfortunately going to be the case. But now at least you can stand up and say, the Supreme Court has made a judgment. This is where the law is. You may not agree with me. You may not find it fashionable to believe this, but it's the law, it's reality.
Michael Walker, the fact of the matter is a lot of that hostility and harassment did come from parts of the left that always struggled with this idea that actually the definition of a woman should be based on biological sex. So where does this leave that group on the left that have been campaigning so aggressively against campaigners who have emerged triumphant?
Well, I mean, on this issue, I've always tried to have a compromise position, which hasn't made me popular on either side. Right, so I've understood the sort of concerns that people have about self-ID. I think there are certain aspects of life where sex is very simple. Elite sport, for example, it probably just should be people who are completely born female. What's worried me today is especially sort of the comments from the Equality and Human Rights Commission saying that no trans person ever can use a toilet of their sex that they've become, because this will include people who've been taking hormones for 3 decades, people who've lived their lives as a woman for 3 decades, who now are going to have to, or presumably go into the male toilets, even though they've got breasts, they've got secondary sex characteristics. Hormones make a big difference. So if you've reduced your testosterone, the thing people are worried about generally when it comes to trans women is strength and aggression. Men are more strong and they're more aggressive than women. But that's pretty much because of the testosterone flowing through our bodies. So if you are a trans woman and you've been taking hormones for a very long time, you're still going to have a bigger bone structure, which means you might be better at swimming, but you are going to be less aggressive, you're going to be less strong, which to me makes it seem as if these people have been using female toilets or female changing rooms for the past 30 years, why are we suddenly making it very difficult for them to go anywhere?
Marion?
The reason why we don't want males in our spaces, regardless how they identify, is because they're male. They could be the nicest person on this planet. It doesn't matter.
So someone who's been on I suppose, hormones for the past 30 years. They've been living as a woman for the past 30 years.
There's no such thing as living as a woman.
People, well, I mean, they're on hormones, right? So one of the big things about being a man or woman is the hormones that go through your body. So you just don't think that anyone can be trans, essentially?
I just don't think anyone can change their sex.
Well, it depends. I think it's context dependent on what you're talking about.
Not
so
really.
as I say, when it comes to sport,
as shown in the Supreme Court yesterday.
Well, let's just answer this question though. So what should the person who's been living for 3 decades as a woman, who's been taking hormones for 3 decades, they've got breasts, they've got high voice, they might pass as a woman in most parts of society, what toilet should they go into?
They should go to the males, and the males should actually be more supportive to their siblings, their brethren, who actually want to identify in a different way.
What if their men aren't?
The other way.
You know?
Well, that's where we do have harassment laws, of which actually protects those, and that's what's actually protected under the
But if you're saying
EHRC.
we've got these harassment laws, so obviously the argument about toilets is because people recognise that police aren't always there. You know, so when your problem with self-ID has been that while it might not be the case that usually someone who self-identifies as a woman is going to sort of attack someone, and that would be illegal anyway.
You're going
you don't want to be in that position of risk. So now, a person who's been living as a woman the whole time looks like a woman, has breasts, has a high voice. If they go into a male toilet, they are going to be vulnerable to abuse.
Males, because it's males. So it doesn't matter about how how you look and what you're talking about is passing. This is based on stereotypes. So I'm totally against the stereotype
so
of
what do you
anyone.
think? What do you think gender dysphoria is, though?
It's a
because
mental health
there's a medical
condition.
diagnosis for gender dysphoria. And the way to resolve
you
that,
use the toilets of the opposite sex.
No, so,
Clearly,
so the way to
diagnosis
resolve
doesn't say that.
The way to resolve that is to begin to transition as the other sex to which you feel inclined.
In 10 years' time, we'll look back and actually wonder what we did to these people, rather than actually encouraging them to actually be happy within their own bodies, rather than medicalising them and actually putting them on surgeries and telling them a lie that it's impossible to actually change.
So I think we might look back at this in the same way that we look about how people talked about homosexuals in the 1960s.
Nothing to do with same-sex attraction.
Well, either way, the debate is going to carry on in the studio, but not necessarily out there in the courts, with the UK Supreme Court being pretty definitive, and I think a lot of institutions are going to have to follow them in that judgment. So a historic day here in the UK.